Hello everyone. I hope you've been preparing very well for your upcoming exams. But what you right now need is also the set of amendments which will be applicable for income tax purposes to add much more to your preparations. So let's start with understanding what are the amendments that is going to affect in your attempt. So these are the amendments for income tax that is applicable in May 2025. Before we start, I must say you there are a whole host of amendments that you need to take into account. If you have already studied from the beginning this particular financial year, you will not have an issue. But had you prepared for the earlier financial year, you will have to take into account all of these amendments. Please understand, this is applicable for previous year 24-25. We're talking about AY 25-26. Now this year was particularly very special. Why? Because there were two budgets which came during the year, which means two times the act had been amended. We had first budget on the 1st of February and the second one on 23rd July 2024. Yes, you must already be knowing the reason. It was the general elections conducted in between. Election year particularly has two budgets. Why? Because the first budget is referred to as interim budget. It's more like given for a very short period of time with not much of control given to the government during that time. It is the outgoing government, so they can't propose too many things in the bill. However, when the new government comes after the general elections, a whole host of changes has been brought. And that is what happened even in this bill. So we need to take into account what has happened in both of those bills. Major amendments are happening in your Finance Bill number 2. Let's start with the tax rates. So you know very well there are two regimes, the default tax regime and the optional tax regime, the regular tax regime. The regular tax regime, there has not been any change. We follow the same age criteria, below 60, 62, 80 and above 80. So there is no change there. However, there have been certain rate changes in your default tax regime. In the default tax regime, for individual HUF, AOP, BOI and artificial judicial person, up to 3 lakh, it is nil. 3 to 7, please note the limit now is 3 to 7 lakhs, it is 5%. 7 to 10, 10%. 10 to 12, 15%. 12 to 15, 20%. And above 15 lakhs, 30%. So this has been the new revised rate structure for default tax regime. All of this amendment in the PDF format will be available to you all in the description link below. Surcharge rates. Please note, we're talking about surcharge rate without special income. To give you a quick recap, if there is a special income in terms of long-term capital gain, 112, we're talking about other than equity, long-term capital gain on equity, equity-oriented mutual funds, short-term capital gain on equity, equity-oriented funds, 111A, dividend income. For these incomes, the surcharge rate maximum would only be 15%. That's why we call them as special income. They only get a maximum surcharge of 15%. What surcharge we are talking about is other than these. So other income without these special income. Let's take into account where is the change happening. So we have default and optional. You know very well, below 50 lakhs, there is no surcharge. 50 lakhs to 1 crore, if the total income exceeds 50 lakhs, up to 1 crore, it is 10% in both the scenarios, whether it is default or optional tax regime. If the total income or taxable income exceeds 1 crore, but within 2 crores, it is 15% of surcharge. And if it is between 2 crores to 5 crores, it is 25% of tax of surcharge. And if it is more than if the taxable income is more than 5 crores, in that case it is 25% of surcharge rate. However, the optional continues to be at 37%. To put it in simple terms, if the taxable income exceeds 2 crores, for default tax regime, your surcharge is 25%. It's simple. Total income exceeding 2 crores and above, no matter what it is, the surcharge rate is 25%, which means the maximum surcharge for your default tax regime is only going to be 25%, but for optional, it is 37. So, everywhere in every step, we have understood the pattern. They are trying to make the default tax regime more lucrative. So the same has been done even here. Moving on next with regard to the company's tax rate. There are two kinds of company, domestic company and foreign company. Now you know very well we check into the 400 crore turnover criteria. Now please understand I am taking 3 previous years. We are going to calculate the tax for the previous year 24-25. But the budget may come even here. So we ignore this year's turnover and we take into account the year which is fully completed. So we see what is the turnover during the previous year 22-23 in the case of domestic companies. Is it within 400 crores? If yes, the tax rate is going to be 25%. If not, the regular rates would be prevailing. In the case of foreign company, please note the tax rate is now 35%. Okay? So these are your changes with regard to tax rates. Residential status, there has been no much change there. Exemptions also, there has not been much change. The next important change is with regard to salary chapter. Let's understand this one now. There has been a change in your standard deduction mentioned under section 16(1)(a). Okay? To simply say, they have only changed what is your standard deduction limit under default tax regime. So, this limit has now been enhanced to 75,000. From 50,000, it has gone up to 75,000. Again, notice the same pattern. A little favor is given towards more of default tax regime. So optional tax regime is still the same. We take lower of salary or 50,000, whereas for default tax regime, standard deduction limit is now 75,000. Of course, we compare that with the gross salary and take whichever is lower. To give you a small example, under default tax regime, if the gross salary is 12 lakhs, we can claim a deduction of up to rupees 75,000. Therefore, the taxable salary will now be 1125. And with regard to the optional tax regime, it would only be 50,000, which means the taxable salary is 1150 here. This is with regard to your salary amendment. Next head would be income from house property. Two major amendments have come here, which you need to understand very carefully. Likely area that questions could be picked up from this segment. So let's understand it very clearly. Two things. First, what they say, interest on borrowed capital not deductible for self-occupied property under the default tax regime. What are they trying to say? We normally take up if I take a look at your computation of income from house property, if it is a self-occupied property, okay, and let's say if it is your optional tax regime, anyways your NAV, the net annual value would be nil, but you would be allowed to claim interest on borrowed capital under section 24B. Okay, whatever amount is there, you're allowed to claim that. But now if a person is opting for default tax regime, if it is default tax regime, this deduction will not be given. Please remember, it is only for self-occupied property that interest deduction will not be given. For default, for let out property, you continue to claim the interest deduction. Okay? This is your first amendment which has come here. Which means now if I compute the income from house property, if it is self-occupied and if it is under your default tax regime, NAV is taken as nil. Deduction under section 24B towards interest on borrowed capital is nil. You may have 50,000, you may have 1 lakh, whatever is the amount, we don't claim here. So what happens to that amount? It is redundant. It has no purpose here. Okay? Second amendment, which has come under house property, says that the loss from house property, doesn't matter which property, under default tax regime cannot be set off against other heads, nor can it be carried forward. What are they saying us here? We have three kinds of properties: self-occupied, let out, and deemed to be let out. You understand very well how we bifurcate between these properties. Interest, we can't claim here. However, we can claim here. Let's say, because of your interest being more than the rental value, eventually you have a loss here. Loss of, let's say, 1 lakh rupees. And there is an income under different heads. Could be salary, could be income from other sources, any head. Question is, can you set off the loss here from your income from other heads? If it is default, no, you can't. If it is optional, you can continue to do the set off. But under your default tax regime, please note, you cannot set off loss of house property from different heads. Okay? At the same time, if I give you an example, let's say there is a 50,000 of interest loss here and a 75,000 of income here. Can you set it off within the head? Yes, you can do that. So your taxable house property income would be 25,000 only. However, can you set off the loss with different heads? No, you can't. Be very clear here. You can't set it off. Which means, what to do with this loss? Can we carry it forward? No, we can't. We can neither set it off against other heads, nor it can be carried forward. Which means, it just goes off, it just lapses off. Yes, you've got it right. Let's take a small example. If I have income from salary of 12 lakhs, we are computing under default tax regime even here. And if there is a loss from house property of 40,000, can I set it off? The answer is no, we can't set it off, which means gross total income would continue to be 12 lakhs. We are assuming this is computed after all deductions. So what do we do? With this loss, as far as your problems are concerned, you only give a note saying that the loss under the default tax regime can neither be set off with the other heads, nor it can be carried forward. Please remember to give this note, it will be very important. Okay, so we only give a note, it can neither be set off against different heads, nor it can be carried forward. This is with regard to your house property. The next set of amendments are for your PGBP, profits and gains of business or profession. And the first one again revolves around your property only. There has been a small explanation added to the chargeable section 28. What does it say? It says, any income from letting out of residential house property or a part of the house shall not be taxable under PGBP but under income from house property. What does it mean? See, properties are of two kinds, residential and commercial. Okay? So your residential would be where a person dwells. Commercial could be where they are conducting business, could be for offices, could be for your showrooms, could be a hotel, all of this. So if they are having a residential property, and if it is let out, you know very well the income would be from house property only. If they are in the business of letting out of residential properties, even that would be considered as income from house property only. Okay, so if let's say a person is having a house, they get it listed under some website and start doing a business of letting out. Even then, they let out for 2 days, 3 days, and so on. But the nature is still a residential house. So even then, it would be taxed under income from house property only. So if it is a residential property, it doesn't matter if it is only let out or if it is in the nature of business of letting out. No matter what is the purpose here, it will always be income from house property only. This is the explanation added. Let's understand how the stand is different when it comes to commercial properties. If the commercial property is let out, it could be like a place let out for office premises, that would also be considered as income from house property only. But if it's a business of letting out, okay, if they have a business of letting out, it would be taken as PGBP. Be very clear, it would be taken as PGBP only. So we have to be very clear. The only place where PGBP is coming is a commercial property let out as a business of letting out. This is your first change here. Second one, we know very well any kind of penalty, any kind of an amount paid for violation of any law will not be allowed under section 37. Let's say in a business organization, there is a person who is going to deposit cash in the bank. He takes a two-wheeler and goes in it, and he forgets to wear his helmet. The cops catch him and he has to pay a penalty of 2,000. Yes? So considering you're the employer, because he incurred this during the office hours, you are reimbursing him. Comes a question, can this 2,000 be claimed as an expense under section 37? Your general deduction. The answer is no. It is a fine or a penalty levied for violating some kind of a traffic law. Therefore, it will not be permitted. This was already there. What have they added here is that settlement amount paid to settle the contraventions will now not be allowed as deduction. Sometimes, if the cases go to, let's say, a tribunal level or it goes to appellate level, they say that, you know what, you have an interest, you have a penalty, you have an amount payable to the authority. So they would settle. Don't pay this, pay this amount and we will settle up the case. Even these settlement amounts cannot be claimed as deduction. Be very clear. Even this is now disallowed. So this is also more of an explanation in nature, adding on to what already exists. The next one is in terms of section 80CCD. Okay, it's your pension scheme. You know very well, whenever there is a scheme for the welfare of the employees, there would be two people contributing. We have the employer contributing and the employee contributing. Okay, so when two people contribute to a fund, both of them will have certain implications. If it is the employer who is contributing here, it is an expense for him. He is paying salary. Also, he is contributing to some kind of a employee welfare fund. In our case, pension fund. So, which means, can this amount be claimed as an expense? The answer is yes. Deduction is allowed under 36. But to what extent? The actual contribution or 14% of salary, whichever is lower. This limit has now become 14% of salary. This is from the perspective of the employer. So can employer claim deduction? Yes, they can very much claim deduction up to 14% of salary or actual contribution, whichever is less. What happens in the hands of the employee? Employee has received contribution of employer. It's eventually going to come to him. So first thing, we'll take it as his income. So first it will be taxable as salary. It would be taxed as his salary income. And then the same thing becomes eligible for deduction under section 80CCD. How much? They say we'll take lower of actual contribution or 10% or 14% of salary under the optional tax regime. 10% or 14% of salary under the optional tax regime. This is already there. So if it is central government or state government employer, it is 14. For others, it is 10%. This is under the optional tax regime. So this is no change. This was already there. What is the change? If the person is under default tax regime, it is 14% no matter who is the employer. Yes, so it would directly be 14% of salary irrespective of who the employer is. So this is the change here. Another major change has come in terms of how we give remuneration to the partners. So we are talking about the firms here, partnership firms. There had been an earlier limit of 3 lakhs and maximum of 1,50,000 on the first 3 lakhs. That limit has now been revised. So let's forget what was the earlier limit and focus only on the new limit. So they say, whatever is your book profit, on the first 6 lakhs, we'll take 90% of the book profit or 3 lakhs, whichever is higher, and on the balance, 60%. Which means we take the book profit and divide it as first 6 lakhs. Let's start from 0. So first 6 lakhs and we'll call this as the balance. On the first 6 lakhs, we take up 90% of whatever is the book profit or 3 lakhs whichever is higher, and on the balance we take 60% of book profit. Let's understand this better with a problem. Imagine your book profit to be 12,50,000. Okay, so now we're starting from 0 and going up to 12.5 lakhs. On the first 6 lakhs, okay, so this is your first 6 lakhs. On this, we can take higher of 3 lakhs or 90% of book profit, which means 90% of 6 lakhs. I'm only talking about the 6 lakh limit. 90% of 6 lakhs. This is your 5,40,000. So we have 3 lakh or 5,40,000, whichever is higher, the higher is 5,40,000. So this is on the first 6 lakhs. On the balance, how much can we take? 60% of book profit. So the balance is 12 minus 6, 6,50,000 into 60%. It comes to 3,90,000, which means allowable remuneration to the partners would be 5,40,000 plus 3,90,000, totaling up to 9,30,000. Okay, this is how we will be computing the book profits or allowable remuneration. I'll give you one more example. What if the book profit is only 3,10,000? It's not even crossing 6 lakhs. It's only 3,10,000. So there is no question on the first 6 lakhs and on the balance. It's within 6 lakhs. So we take up the same parameter here. Since it is a part of within 6 lakhs, I'll take up 90% of the book profit. Maximum book profit is 3,10,000 here. So 3,10,000 into 90% is 2,79,000 or 3 lakh, whichever is higher. Higher of the two is 3 lakhs. So therefore, maximum allowable remuneration to the partners would be 3 lakhs. What if this book profit is resulting in loss? Can we still give 3 lakhs? Yes, we can still give 3 lakhs. So those were your changes with regard to PGBP. Up next is capital gains. Let me tell you, there have been a lot of changes in capital gains, but not very difficult. We can understand them easily. So let's start. If you had seen the budget, not this budget which came the last year, your 23-7-24 budget, there had been certain increases in capital gain rates. So what happened? They told your short-term capital gain, which is now 15%, will now be increased to 20%. Long-term capital gain, we are talking about 111A and 112A, which is 10%, will now be increased to 12.5. But when did this come? On the budget dated 23-7-2024. Now, this would have a lot of implication. They can't take it retrospectively because let's say I have sold a particular share on 10-4-2024. That date, the rate of long-term capital gain was only 12. So according to me, I am selling at a 10% tax rate. So which means they cannot bring a retrospective effect. It makes no sense here. They can only bring a prospective effect. Why give on the same day of the budget? Why make the cutoff on the same day? Because if they give a cushion, people will again start booking all the profits at the lower rate itself. So to avoid all the ambiguity, the cutoff for us happens to be the budget date itself, which means you have two set of rates during the year. One is for the transfers before 23-7 and one is for the transfers on or after 23-7. When you do a problem, be very clear on what is your date of transfer. Please look at that twice. Is it before 23-7-24 or after 23-7-24? If it is before, we have no changes. Long-term capital gain rate is 10%, short-term capital gain under 111A is 15%, and long-term capital gain other than equity, which is your 112, is 20%. No change except for one small change here, which I'll tell you a little later. However, if your transfer has happened after 23-7-24, please note, long-term capital gain rate is increased to 12.5%, short-term under 111A to 20%, and other long-term capital gain has been reduced to 12.5%. Yes, it has been reduced to 12.5%. So, long-term capital gain rate after 23-7-24, your long-term capital gain, whether it is 112A or 112 after 23-7-24 would be 12.5% only. However, there is one small thing here. You do get an exemption of rupees 1,25,000 for equity-based capital gains. Now, what is that? This limit was earlier 1 lakh, which is now enhanced to 1,25,000. Let's say I have two gains, okay? I have one gain of 1 lakh before 23-7. On or after, I have another 1 lakh of capital gain. So total gain comes to 2 lakhs. Please remember, we can claim an exemption of 1,25,000. If I take this one, it is taxed at 10% and this one at 12.5%. Can I use it to my advantage and deduct the entire 1,20,000 after 23-7 gain? Can I deduct the entire 1,25,000 from here and then the balance from there? Yes, we can do that. So if you want, you can do that also. So if you have before as 1 lakh and after 23-7 as 1 lakh, and I have to allocate 1,25,000, can I allocate 1 lakh here and 25,000 here? The balance would be 75,000 at 10%. Can I do that? Yes, we can do that. There is an exemption of 1,25,000 but it nowhere specifies where should we claim this exemption from, which means it is totally left to the assessee. He will obviously use to the best of his advantage. Yes, so we can deduct this 1,25,000 from both the places, no problem there. This is your first change in capital gains. There has been another change, transfer of capital asset by individual or HUF under gift will or irrevocable trust under section 47 will be considered towards exempt transfer. What's new here? We already knew gift is an exempt transfer, will is an exempt transfer, irrevocable trust is an exempt transfer. What is new is that they have added this word individual or HUF now, which was missing earlier, which means implication is only when individual or HUF is giving gift, only then it is exempt. If it is a will of an individual or HUF, only then it is exempt. Okay? It does not extend to other entities. It is only for individual and HUF now. The other area where things have changed is your period of holding. What was the period of holding earlier, which continues to be till 23/7/24? Let's categorize them in three categories. Category A, listed shares in recognized stock exchange in India, units of equity-oriented fund, units of UTI, zero coupon bond. For all of them, it would be considered as a long-term capital asset if it is held for a period exceeding 12 months. Unlisted shares, land, building and both would be taken as a long-term if it is held for 2 years or more. And other capital asset, unlisted securities would be taken as long-term if it is held for 3 years or more. This was the classification earlier. What has changed after 23/7/24 is we have only two categories. First, your category A is retained as such, listed securities in recognized stock exchange, units of unit-oriented fund, UTI, zero coupon bonds, and the holding period is also retained as such. Okay, so if you're holding them for 12 months or more, they shall always be long-term capital asset only. All the other assets have been grouped as other capital assets, and the holding period for them is 24 months now, which means earlier, if gold was given a classification here, now it comes here. Okay, so earlier gold, in order to be a capital long-term capital asset, holding period would have been 3 years, but now it is only 2 years. So can I say an advantage has been given? No, it's actually the other way around. The reason is they have removed indexation to a very larger extent. How is it impacting? We'll understand in a bit. But for now, make sure the holding period concept is very clear. There is one more small thing with regard to your holding period which you need to understand. Now, before I explain you what is happening, you need to understand a little background. Now, if a person wants a safe investment, they would look outside your equity shares. So, the first thing a person would do is invest in FD, very safe, invest with a bank. Or another thing that would do is they would invest in some kind of debenture fund, debt fund, corporate bonds, or your government security bonds. So I would call them all as debt-based funds. Okay? Let's say a person is in any regime and the income is exceeding already 15 lakhs. So he's having existing income exceeding 15 lakhs, which means he is at a 30% tax bracket, highest. And if he is having FD income, let's say his interest income comes to 1 lakh, it would be taxed at 30% because it's over and above 15 lakhs. So he is paying a tax of 30,000. Now what happened is, here you're paying at 30%, but here people would hold it for a longer period convert it into a long-term capital asset and only pay, depending on the rate, 20%, enjoy the indexation benefit, and other things would be happening here. Now the government is saying no. What we'll do is, we will consider these funds as short-term capital asset only, no matter how long you are holding them, which means irrespective of holding period, they would always be short-term capital asset. And they are not equity, which means other than equity short-term capital gains would be taxed, it would not be A, other than equity short-term capital gain would always be taxed on slabs. Again, because his income is exceeding 15 lakhs, it would be taxed at 30%, which means both the instruments now have a level playing field in terms of taxation. Earlier, there would be some advantage given to debt-based funds. So now that advantage has been removed. Now let's understand what is your amendments speaking about. Transfer of the following capital asset shall always be regarded as short-term capital gain, irrespective of the holding period. What assets are we talking about? First one, specified mutual funds acquired after 1/4/23. Why after date is given here? Because anyone who has acquired before that was under the impression the tax would not be on slabs. What is a specified mutual fund? It is where not more than 35% is invested in equity. Market-linked debentures, again they are debt-based mutual fund. Unlisted bonds, unlisted debentures, which is redeemed on or after 23/7/24. This is your amendment date. Okay. The next amendment which came was for indexation benefit. It says, long-term capital assets usually enjoy some kind of indexation. This benefit will not be available after 23/7/24. Now, this came with a lot of controversy. People said, the whole purpose we have been holding the asset is because we will get indexation. How can you take that from us? So they said, okay, fine. We'll come up with a new clarification. What is it? Please understand. In case there is a capital asset, I'm talking about gold first. Okay. If gold has been held for more than 3 years earlier, it would have been considered as a long-term capital asset. It would get indexation and would be taxed at 20%. This is the scenario before 23/7/24. What happens now? They say we will not give indexation benefit. It's long-term. In that case, we'll tax it at 12.5% without indexation. People said, we have invested in properties based on the assumption of indexation. Now what to do for that? Then they bought certain relaxation. What they said? In case you are a resident individual or HUF, okay? So it's important you be a resident individual HUF. Second thing, we are talking about only immovable property, land, building or land and building. We are only talking about immovable property. So if there are immovable property held by whom? Resident individual and HUF. If they transfer, they get some leniency towards indexation. If it is transferred before 23/7, you still get the indexation benefit and it would be taxed at long-term 20%, just like how this gold example worked. No changes here. The only change happens is if the transfer is after 23/7/24. Okay? Let's say the property has also been acquired after 23/7/24. How does that work? On 1/10/24, property has been acquired, let's say for 10 lakhs. And on 1/12/27, holding period is definitely more than 24 months, the property is sold for 50 lakhs. They say You have acquired the property after 23/7 and you're selling the property after 23/7. So you will not get any indexation. Whatever is your long-term capital gain, pay tax at 12.5%. Okay, so my long-term capital gain here is 40 lakhs. I have to pay into 12.5% as my long-term capital gain tax. The question is, what if it is acquired before 23/7/24? Then what happens? Now to explain you what is happening, I'll give you a small example. So what it says is, in case the long-term capital asset has been acquired before 23/7/24, for the calculation part of capital gain, we are still not giving indexation. Whatever is happening at the tax area. Let me explain you with an example. Let's say a property is purchased 2 years back. It's a long-term capital asset. Okay? And the sales consideration happened to be 1 crore. We call this as your full value of consideration. We are talking about deduction of cost of acquisition. Please note, even if it is long term, I am not using the word indexed cost of acquisition. I am using the word cost of acquisition. Assume the cost of acquisition was 10 lakhs. So we'll say the long term capital gain is 90. Then we compute the other income. Let's say there is income from other sources, 5 lakhs. And therefore the gross total income comes to 95 lakhs. Okay? When we are doing the tax calculation, tax on above, what we do here is, we'll take a small working note. And on that working note, we will be doing the indexation calculation. So we are not doing anything here with regard to indexation in terms of calculations. Whatever is the calculation, we are taking it in the working note. Here in the working note, we say the tax will be given based on the lower of the following. Lower of what? 12.5% without indexation and 20% with indexation. So we'll take 12.5% without indexation. What is my capital gain? 95 lakhs into 12.5%. This comes to rupees 11.25 lakhs. Okay? Or I can take 20% with indexation. Okay, so we do the calculation entirely again, giving indexation. So which means full value of consideration here is 1 crore less index cost of acquisition. So here we'll take your cost of acquisition, divide by the CII, multiply with the current year CII, all that will give the indexation. Assuming for our assumption purposes, it comes to 80 lakhs. 20 lakhs is your long-term capital gain. Into 20%, it comes to 4 lakhs. So we'll take whichever is lower. Tax on above would be 4 lakhs here. And we calculate tax on the balance of income and we continue. Okay? Why? Why can't we do it in the main calculation itself? What's the whole point of taking into the working note? The point is, you have to be extremely careful when you're giving surcharge. Surcharge says, if your taxable or total income exceeds 50 lakhs, you have to give surcharge. Yes? Has it exceeded 50 lakhs? Yes. Had you taken it index cost of acquisition, the capital gain would not have exceeded 50 lakhs, which means now you have to provide for surcharge also. So this is your indirect way of taxing the person here. Okay, so we are very clear. If it is a transfer of property, which property? Immovable property. By whom? Resident individual and HUF. If they have transferred before 23/7/24, they get indexation benefit as usual. You compute as usual, and 20% is going to be your long-term capital gain rate. No changes. However, if it is transferred after 23/7, we check what is the date of acquisition. Is it also after 23/7? In that case, no indexation, taxed at 12.5%. But if it is acquired before 23/7, we don't give indexation in the working part, we do it only in the tax calculation part. So your capital gains are calculated without indexation, but the tax is calculated taking into account lower of the two, which is 12.5% without indexation and 20% with indexation. Please understand this concept very thoroughly in detail. You can expect a question in this area for sure. The next area where there has been a big amendment is in terms of buyback of shares. What is buyback? Buyback is basically the company is wanting to buy back its own share. Yes? So they are buying their own share. What used to happen earlier is buyback. Whenever the company is buying back their shares, they would pay tax. The company will pay tax, and for the shareholders, it would be exempt. So if domestic company has bought back before 23/7, they would have paid the additional tax, 20 plus surcharge plus cess comes to 23.296, and it would be completely exempt in the hands of the shareholders. But now, what has happened? This is only for domestic company. Foreign company or other than domestic company, we used to treat it as your other long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains. That is, your full value of consideration would be the buyback price. Let's say the company has issued shares. We have 100 shares at 50 rupees each, which means this is our cost of acquisition. And the buyback price happens to be 60 rupees, which means we are getting 6,000 from the company. So the full value of consideration would have been 6,000. Depending on when is it acquired, whether it is long term or short term, we would take into account and give indexation. Assuming it is transferred after 23/7, no indexation. So the cost is deducted straight away, and your capital gains, long term or short term, is computed. This is for other than domestic company. Comes a question, what has happened to the domestic company who have transferred their shares after 23/7/24? So we know very well, full value of consideration, or rather the buyback price. The buyback price is 60 rupees. We have 100 shares, which is 6,000, and our cost of acquisition is 50 rupees. Therefore, it is 5,000. What they say, whatever you have received from the company on buyback, take it as dividend. Yes, you're hearing it right. We will take it as dividend. So dividend is equal to 6,000 rupees. There is a new insertion of dividend provision 222F. Whatever the company gives during buyback, that will become dividend in simple terms. So what about capital gains? Yes, there will be capital gains also. How? Take the full value of consideration. But have we not already taken 6,000 as dividend? What is left? 6,000 minus 6,000 is equal to nil. So your full value of consideration is nil. Can I subtract the cost of acquisition? Yes. How much is it? 5,000. Therefore, what do I have here? A loss of how much? 5,000. This loss I can set off with my other capital gains. So, in case there is a buyback of shares after 23/7/24 by a domestic company, whatever you receive at the time of buyback, whatever the shareholders receive at the time of buyback, first is a dividend under 222F, and then capital gains, or rather capital loss, is computed to the extent of your cost of acquisition. So which means if there is a bonus share, cost of acquisition is nil. Okay, please be very careful there. So it is deemed dividend under 222F, which is nothing but amount received on buyback, and loss, short term, long term, depending on the holding period, will be computed as full value of consideration minus cost of acquisition. We know full value of consideration as nil. Your cost inflation index for the year 24-25 is 363. So those are your changes with regard to capital gains. Let's move on to income from other sources. Two very small amendments have come here. One is with regard to your pension. We know very well, if pension is received by the employee himself or herself, it's nothing but a part of salary. And salary gives a standard deduction. How much? If it is optional, 50,000. If it is default, 75,000. Of course, we compare this with the actual and take whichever is lower. If other than employee, someone else is receiving pension, which is nothing but the family. If the employee has died during service or any other reason, and the family is receiving the pension, in that case, there is no employer-employee relationship, so it goes to income from other sources. Does it also get a deduction? Yes. It gets a deduction of 1/3 of the pension or 15,000. 1/3 of the pension or 15,000, whichever is lower. This is for the, yes, your regular optional tax regime. For default, the limit has increased to 25,000. So 1/3 of the pension or 25,000, whichever is lower, will be taken into account for deduction under section 57 against family pension. This is your first amendment here. Second amendment, if you have recalled, this is for the students who have studied in the earlier financial year, we used to compute something for private limited companies. If they have issued shares at a premium and if the amount have exceeded the fair market value, it would have been taxed as income in the hands of private limited company. This entire provision has now been deleted. So if you have studied that provision, it's deleted. If you have not even studied this provision, please don't bother. You don't know about it. That's why it's deleted. TDS and TCS. There have been a few changes even in terms of tax deduction and collection at source. Let's understand from the first one, section 192. 192 is TDS on salary. It's just a small clarification. It says that if any employee has TCS collection anywhere, and if that employee is informing the details to the employer, he has to take into account and accordingly deduct tax. What does it mean? Let's say there is an employee X. We'll get the famous person Mr. X back. So we have X, and he happens to buy a car exceeding rupees 10 lakhs. There would obviously be TCS. Let's say there is a TCS of 10,000. Okay? So this 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, whatever is the amount, he has to inform it to the employer. The employer will also be computing his tax and will take into account this TCS. and then on the balance, he will deduct tax. So that's a small clarification which has come. There are some rates which have changed in terms of TDS, but the cutoff here is 110.24. So if the deduction happens before 110.24, we follow certain rates, and if it is happening after 110.24, we follow different rates. Notice the pattern. Wherever there was a 5% rate, it has reduced to 2%. Where has this happened? It has happened on commission on sale of lottery ticket 194G. Other than that, your general commission rate 194H, 194-day maturity of LIC or LIP policies, 194IB rent of immovable property where the monthly rent exceeds rupees 50,000, 194M contract commission brokerage professional fees. If you remember, it is for those individuals where 194C, 194H, 194J, 194C have not been applicable. 50 lakh is your limit there. For that section also, it has now become 2% if it is after 110.24. Within the year, you have two rates. Be careful. See the date of deduction, the date of amount of payment or credit. Check that date and accordingly compute your rate. The next amendment which has come is in section 194IA. Again, a small amendment here. 194IA was with regard to transfer of immovable property other than the agricultural land. So when the buyer, whenever he is making payment and the amount exceeds 50 lakhs, tax needs to be deducted at 1%. What they have said is, even if there are multiple transferor or transferee, we take into account aggregate sum. Okay, so the aggregate sum of that particular property needs to be taken into account and not individually how much are you paying or receiving. This is a clarification given. So even if there are 4 people dealing with it and the property value is 75 lakhs, doesn't matter individually whether you're getting 50 lakhs or not. Property value exceeding 50 lakhs. So yes, you will have TDS applicability. Again, a very small clarification has been given. It says that where any sum referred to under section 194J, it does not fall within the definition of 194C. Simple. If it is covered under your professional services, technical services under section 194J, it will not get covered under 194C. We already do that. One particular provision of payment can attract TDS only in one place. In terms of filing of return, small clarifications again has come. After 1/7/2017, we know it is mandatory to quote Aadhaar whenever there is a filing of return. And before your 110.24, if Aadhaar was not available, it was okay to quote the enrollment ID. What is enrollment ID? When you make an application for Aadhaar, you get your enrollment ID. So if you don't have Aadhaar, it is okay, you quote your enrollment ID. Now what they say,